Yeah, hello everyone. I'm very pleased to be here today. My name is Karolin Langfeldt, and as just said, I'm Business Development Director at Circulor. And yeah, I'm honored to be here today and to discuss with you the question of how environmentally friendly cars really are. So maybe first a few words about Circulor. Circulor is a software as a service company, and we developed a solution to trace critical raw materials from the source to the final product. So we were founded in 2017, so we're quite a young company. But ever since, so for the last 7 years, have been on a mission to work out how to use new technologies to bring transparency to complex industrial supply chains, and how to make information which sits along the supply chains accessible to companies. So information on provenance, information on CO2 emissions, especially Scope 3, information on in which countries does my supply chain sit. And yeah, how are we going to do this? I'm going to talk about that in a second. Oh, sorry, I forgot to change the slides. Let me first talk about the network or the ecosystem we operate in. So here you see our partners, investors, customers, and the network, and maybe a few words about our network. So we are part of the Battery Pass with consortium, which is funded by the German Ministry for Economics and Climate, together with Audi, BASF, Umicore, Systemic, and a few others. We work on technological guidance as well as content guidance on the European battery regulation, and we develop a battery passport. Then we are part of Catena X, and they will also be here tomorrow and speak more about the battery passport in detail. We are part of the Global Battery Alliance. So you see, like, this is the ecosystem we operate in. But now let's look at our customers, and you see we have a focus on the automotive industry, especially electric vehicles. You see quite a few OEMs, you see cell manufacturers, battery manufacturers, as well as upstream suppliers. And I think this already gives a little hint on, my answer, or part of my answer, of how environmentally friendly electric vehicles really are. Because, like, if we want to understand the environmental impact of the car, we need to look at the battery and especially its supply chain. As we all know, electric vehicles have an ultra-low carbon footprint once they are on the road, but they have an emission challenge of their own, and this emission challenge is the battery. So an electric vehicle battery contains nickel, manganese, cobalt, lithium, graphite, depending, of course, always on the chemistry, and the battery causes 40 to 60% of the emissions which come with the electric vehicle, because, like, those materials such as nickel, cobalt, etc., they submit substantial greenhouse gas emissions during the mining and the refining process. So, but unfortunately, CO2 is not the only challenge which comes with the battery or with the electric vehicle. We also have to look at other environmental challenges. So, for example, water intensity, wastewater management. For example, lithium and cobalt are considered typically very water heavy in production. Also, we have to look at social aspects. So, for example, and I think we all know it, that unfortunately human rights abuses such as child labor, forced eviction of entire communities, modern slavery, and sexual assault is quite frequent along the supply chains of critical raw materials. So in order to turn the mobility transition into a success, we really need to look into the supply chains of those batteries. But how do we do it? This is always the big question, because from my experience, many companies don't have visibility beyond tier 1. Sometimes they know they're tier 2, but this is not quite common. So remember the digital thread I was mentioning at the beginning. So what we do at Circulor is that we create a digital thread which follows the actual material from the source, which can be a mine site, which can be a recycling facility, all the way to the final product, which is in this case the electric vehicle of a battery. And when I say following that material all the way, then I really mean like through all the production processes, so from refining, amalgamation, etc., until we have created a digital twin which can tell the entire story of the product. Of course, this doesn't come without challenges. First of all, because we're not following a banana, for example, which is a banana once you harvest it and once you eat it, but we follow critical raw materials which change along the way the chemical and physical composition. So there's nothing you can attach to it, for example, like no sort of tracker you can attach. And also another challenge is that, of course, we are not working with one-to-one relationships, but we work with supply chains which span the globe, which are extremely complex, and which initially, in most cases, were not designed to be transparent. So what we need to do is that we create a digital twin at the source. As I said, could be recycling facility, could be a mining facility. Let's consider it's mining. Let's take the example of cobalt, for example, coming from the DRC. And then we really look at the material in question. We look at the objectives of our clients. So what do they want to learn from their supply chain? What are the risks connected to the material, but also connected to the country where the material is being sourced? And through which countries does our supply chain lead, and what are the risks associated with these countries? So, like, depending on the outcome of this risk analysis, we then install so-called data points along the supply chain, where we retrieve information which helps us to minimize those risks. So basically, we provide our customers with very detailed information along their supply chains, which helps them to reach their own sustainability objectives, but also which helps them to comply with regulations. Yeah, this is the next point. I think we all know that global regulations are growing in number and complexity. There is a flood of new regulation. We've seen this in the last 2 years entering the global market. This is not complete. This is just like a broad overview. But what is really interesting, like, even though this is a global perspective, most of these regulations really drill down on the supply chain. So from now on, and this will be more stringent in the coming years, supply chain transparency will not be a nice to have, but it will be a must have. But I'm running out of time. Let's look shortly at Europe as well as at the United States. So in light blue, you see the Tax Inflation Reduction Act from the United States, and in dark blue, you see the European Battery Regulation of the European Union. And maybe to start with the United States, so you can see that the United States is subsidizing the local production of batteries, as well as the components needed for making those batteries. So for example, in 2024, 2025, 60% of battery components need to be coming from the United States if you want to get subsidized. And this increases to 90% in 2028 and 100% even in 2029. And it looks quite similar for critical minerals coming from so-called friendly countries. So you can see that the IRA is really pushing the local production, and indirectly then, of course, recycling, because if you want critical minerals coming from United States or friendly countries, you need to make sure that they also stay within the country. So like by pushing local production and recycling, of course, this is also pushing then more sustainable vehicles. Maybe a quick look at the European regulation. So also here you can see that over the next 6 years until 2030 or even 36, so the next 12 years, regulations are becoming more and more stringent, requiring more and more information on, for example, CO2, but also requiring a battery passport, recycled content, etc. Sorry. And yeah, maybe, sorry, I'm just seeing that I'm running out of time or that I'm already overrunning. Maybe just to summarize or to finish this and to come to an answer of how environmentally friendly electric vehicles really are. I think they can be. So we have the technology, we have the know-how, and regulations are setting the tone. And I think now it's like really on the industry to make the change and to turn into, to make the mobility transition into a success. Thank you.
Karolin, thanks a lot. We have a couple of questions here, and we will start right away from top to bottom, I would say. First one is, with the discussion on e-fuels, this is connected to the panel discussion we just had, with the discussion on e-fuels in mind and considering your elaboration on EV supply chain, do you believe EVs or e-fuels are the solution in 5 years? So that's the question the panel answered as the very final statement.
Yeah, well, for me, it's definitely EVs. Also, like all my knowledge sits in the electric vehicle industry. Well, if only a fair knowledge of the e-fuel space. But I would definitely go for electric vehicles.
Mm-hmm. What about natrium batteries? Is it a game changer in your opinion?
I think we will see that like in the coming years. I think there are so many new chemistries on the market. And yeah, I think just the coming years will show which one will succeed and which not.
Mm-hmm. We are quick at answering the question. That's good.
Yeah, I have to make up time.
Are there different maturity levels among the OEMs when it comes to optimizing the supply chain?
Yes, most definitely. And I will, of course, not go into details here, but we can see that there are some companies which started very early and which, I mean, we started in 2017, so this was before the European regulation was there. So like everyone we started engaging and working with early was really about bringing transparency to their supply chains, working on their sustainability agendas. And now it's a must. And so all the OEMs need, of course, to comply, but we can see that those who started early back in 2018, 19, of course, now have an advantage.
Mm-hmm. There was another question which goes into the same direction, where it was, how do Chinese OEMs and US OEMs compare to European OEMs?
I mean, they all need to comply if they want to sell batteries or electric vehicles on the European market. And I think like the comparison with the United States is very interesting because the European battery regulation was on the market first, or was in the landscape first, and then the Tax Inflation Reduction Act came. And I think this is like a typical way to see how Europe operates and how the United States. So it came on the market, and they also demand supply chain transparency, for example, supply chain mapping. And yet there was like a very quick rush from American OEMs, but also European OEMs operating in the United States to comply with these regulations, or with, it's not a regulation, but with these incentives. And because also the approach is different. So the European regulation or the US regulation subsidizes you or incentives you, while the European regulation punishes you if you don't comply. So it's just like two completely different approaches.
Okay. By looking at the supply chain, where do you see the biggest optimization opportunity regarding sustainability?
I think definitely in midstream, because this is also where we have the most challenges with, because they don't. Upstream benefits a lot by proving their claims. Downstream has a direct connection to the customers, has a lot of attention of the regulators, so they have more urgent need to comply. And we see then midstream, which is a little bit struggling, also a lot of times smaller companies. So this is where I see, let's say, room for improvement.
Maybe just a quick definition for everyone, what midstream is exactly in your opinion?
So upstream, I would consider all the mining companies, and the midstream, it's the smelters, it's the refiners, it's the manufacturing companies.
Okay. All discussions are around new batteries. What about repairing and reusage? Should this not be pushed and potentially mandatory for manufacturers?
It is. I mean, it's the repairing and reusage of electric vehicles, right?
I think so.
Yeah, it is, and this is also what is like a very big pro of the European battery regulation. So like from 2027 onwards, every car entering, every electric vehicle entering the European market, every battery entering the European market needs to have a battery passport. And there you have like very detailed information for dismantlers, for recyclers, like how to handle the battery. But you also have like in-life data from the battery. And so you can, or dismantlers and recyclers can make a more informed decision of what's going to happen to the battery. Is it up for second use, or is it ready for recycling?
How does the, I like it, Lieferketten-Sorgfaltsgesetz impact your work?
To be honest, not that much, because we are, I think the main driver for us on the European market is the European battery regulation. The Lieferketten-Sorgfaltspflichtengesetz
That's even longer.
Yes, is unfortunately not that stringent when it comes to the requests around supply chain transparency or traceability. So like only in the case of an evidence, companies need to act. So it's like a little bit of a different approach.
Are there other regulations in the pipeline that are more focused on traceability?
Well, the CS3D unfortunately just fell through. This had like a very big focus on supply chain transparency, or we don't know yet if it fell through. So there's another 2 weeks of consultation for it. And this would be one. And then just if we look globally, we see like South Korea putting something similar on the market. Japan is putting something similar on the market. So I think there are more to follow.
One question directly related. Where do you see the strongest regulations, and how will it change maybe in the next 2 years?
I think the strongest regulation I still see in the European Union. And why I think that is because like here we have the strongest focus on sustainability. So the European battery regulation is really built around sustainability, and how it will change in the next 2 years. In the next 2 years. Well, it will change a lot because, I mean, it's now designed, I think, for the next 12 years. So every year there's basically a new requirement adding to it. So it might be an increased recycling efficiency. It might be the battery passport in 2027. So there are steps all the way until 2036.
Understood. Final question. Battery passport is a great idea, but there are different passports risking varying standards. Do you expect passport consolidation?
I'm not quite sure what is meant with different passports, because there's only one battery passport as defined by the European battery regulation. Then there, of course, are different companies issuing battery passports, but they also all have to comply with how the European battery regulation defines the battery passport. And then there are like different consortiums or associations, for example, Catena X, who's working on data standards, which I think will be very crucial. And then there's another one, the Battery Pass Consortium, which is looking at the content and defining the standards. So I think the European battery regulation leaves space for interpretation when it comes to data standards and content standards. So I think this is very important that this is being addressed. But once this is addressed, there will only be one set of data, 107 data points, to be honest, for the battery passport, and everyone needs to deliver it.
Perfect. Thanks a lot, Karolin, for being with us today.
Very well.
Enjoy the rest of the show.
I will.
This is your applause.
Thank you.